Greetings. I'm the man behind the mask, and I'd like to talk to you about hockey. Yes, let's talk about hockey, the show that journeys through the history of the sport of ice hockey from its disputed origins to the game we see today. When we left off, the NHL had just welcomed 4 new teams to the league. However, each of these teams had already been playing for several years in another professional league, known as the World Hockey Association, an organization that, for most of the 70s, was the first major competition for the National Hockey League since the collapse of the Western Hockey League in 1926.
The WHA was founded in 1971 by American promoters Dennis Murphy and Gary Davidson, the founder and first president of the American Basketball Association, respectively. This pair quickly recruited Bill Hunter, president of the Junior Western Canada Hockey League, and traveled across North America recruiting potential owners. And by September of 1971, they announced that the league would begin in the 1972-73 season with 12 teams: the Alberta Oilers, the Chicago Cougars, the Houston Aeros, the Los Angeles Sharks, the Minnesota Fighting Saints, and the Winnipeg Jets formed the league's Western Division, while the Cleveland Crusaders, the New England Whalers, the Ottawa Nationals, the Philadelphia Blazers, the New York Raiders, and the Quebec Nordiques formed the Eastern Division. With the franchises all in place, the next step was to recruit star players that would attract the attention of the fans, and the WHA owners had to look no further than to the rosters of their main competition, the NHL.
Back in 1972, the average NHL salary was $25,000, the lowest of the 4 major sports, and players were bound by a reserve clause that was in place within every player's contract that automatically extended the contract by 1 year when it expired, thus tying them to their team for the life of their career. However, in October of 1972, the WHA announced that not only would it not use the reserve clause, but also promised much higher salaries than the NHL offered.
With these large offers in place, the WHA would lure 67 former NHL players to its rosters by the time the league began play, including Bernie Parent, Jerry Cheevers, Derek Sanderson, J.C. Tremblay, and Andre Lacroix. However, it was not until former Chicago Blackhawks star Bobby Hull agreed to sign a 10-year, $2.7 million contract with the Winnipeg Jets, the largest salary in hockey history at the time, that the league was able to gain instant credibility. With their rosters being raided, the NHL tried to block several of the defections. The Blackhawks were successful in having a restraining order filed against Hull and the Jets, pending the outcome of legal action the Blackhawks were taking against the WHA. However, the district court ruled in favor of the WHA and placed an injunction against the NHL, preventing it from enforcing the reserve clause and freeing all players who had restraining orders against them to play with their WHA clubs, effectively ending the NHL's monopoly on Major League professional hockey talent. With the legalities out of the way, the WHA dropped the first puck of its 78-game season on October 11, 1972, as the Ottawa Nationals faced off against the Alberta Oilers. At the start of the 1973-74 season, despite welcoming new stars to the league such as the Canadiens' Mark Tardif and former NHL legend Gordie Howe, along with his 2 sons Mark and Marty, 4 of the WHA franchises would undergo alterations. The first was when the Alberta Oilers changed their name to the Edmonton Oilers. Then the owners of the Philadelphia Blazers decided to sell their club to a new owner who then promptly moved the team to Vancouver, British Columbia, where they played as the Vancouver Blazers. As a result of their new location, the league also had the club swap divisions with the Chicago Cougars. The third club to change was the Ottawa Nationals, who had been a flop at the box office all season, averaging about 3,000 fans per game. Before the 1972-73 season had ended, the city of Ottawa had demanded a payment of $100,000 to secure dates for the 1973-74 season. Not accepting this, the team chose to leave the city and played their home playoff games for the 1973 playoffs at the Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto. Once the playoffs concluded, the club was then sold to a local investor and permanently moved to Toronto, where they were renamed the Toros. Finally, the last club to receive alterations was the New York Raiders. The team was initially slated to play in the brand-new Nassau Veterans Memorial Coliseum on Long Island, New York. However, wanting nothing to do with the WHA, Nassau County petitioned for an NHL team to play in the new arena instead.
The NHL responded by hastily awarding them the New York Islanders franchise and structured the lease with the Coliseum in such a way to effectively lock out non-NHL teams, forcing the Raiders to play in Madison Square Garden with their major NHL competitor, the New York Rangers. The situation rapidly became untenable. With an onerous lease and poor attendance, the three original owners defaulted, and the league ended up taking control of the team midway through the 1972-73 season.
But at the start of the 1973-74 season, a new local owner had purchased the team and renamed them the New York Golden Blades. However, the situation improved very little from the previous season. At times, the Golden Blades played before crowds of only 500 people in an 18,000-seat arena. Sinking in debt, the new owner surrendered the team to the WHA just 24 games into the season. Soon after taking control, the WHA moved the team to Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and renamed them the New Jersey Knights. But at the start of the next season, in 1974-75, the franchise was once again forced to move, this time landing themselves in San Diego, where they became known as the San Diego Mariners. Additionally, the Los Angeles Sharks franchise was sold to a pair of investors who moved the club to Detroit and renamed it the Michigan Stags. Plus, the league welcomed two completely new franchises for the 1974-75 season, the Phoenix Roadrunners and the Indianapolis Racers. With the addition of Phoenix and Indianapolis, the league restructured itself into a three-division format by placing all of the Canadian teams into their own division. But 43 games into the season, a WHA franchise was once again required to make a mid-season move, when poor attendance and on-ice performance forced the Michigan Stags to fold on January 18, 1975. And a week later, the league relocated all of the players from the Michigan club to Baltimore, where they played out the remainder of the season as the Baltimore Blades. But the Blades' attendance and performance had not improved from when they were the Stags, and the league folded the franchise outright after the season concluded. Prior to the start of the 1975-76 season, the Chicago Cougars went the way of the Baltimore Blades when they closed up shop as well. But the game of musical chairs that the WHA teams were playing did not end there. The Vancouver Blazers became the Calgary Cowboys, and the league welcomed two new clubs, the Cincinnati Stingers and the Denver Spurs. But once again, financial difficulties and poor attendance, as well as ongoing reports that an NHL team was planning to relocate to Denver, resulted in a hasty mid-season move and attempted sale of the Denver Spurs to Ottawa on January 2, 1976, where the team was renamed the Ottawa Civics. Allegedly, the players only learned of the move at their next road game when they stood on the ice and suddenly heard "O Canada" being played. Also, because of the rushed nature of the move, the Civics did not adopt a logo or colors and continued to wear the Spurs uniforms with the front crest removed. But 6 games later, the Ottawa investors that the Denver owners had hoped to sell the team to announced that negotiations had been terminated, and on January 17, 1976, the league issued a brief statement that said that the Ottawa Civics had formally ceased to operate. A little over a month later, on February 28, 1976, the Minnesota Fighting Saints Club also succumbed to financial ruin, as, despite their on-ice success, they were not able to draw in much of a crowd in the overstocked Minnesota market that included the NHL's Minnesota North Stars, the powerful University of Minnesota Golden Gophers, and numerous popular high school teams. So, despite their winning record, they ceased to operate after playing only 59 games in the 1975-76 season. Though it would not be long before the WHA was in Minnesota once again. With the NHL's California Golden Seals setting up shop in Cleveland as the Barons, the WHA's Cleveland Crusaders Club was forced to find a new home. After a proposed move to Florida fell through, the Crusaders relocated to Minnesota, becoming the second incarnation of the Minnesota Fighting Saints for the 1976-77 season. In addition to the Crusaders' move, the Toronto Toros also took a permanent road trip when they relocated to Birmingham, Alabama, and renamed themselves the Bulls. With the movement of Toronto to Birmingham and the loss of the Ottawa Civics and the First Minnesota Club, the league once again restructured, this time to eliminate the Canadian division and return it to a two-divisional format. However, 42 games into the 1976-77 season, the new version of the Fighting Saints had to fold just like the last one, when the club owners were not able to find any local buyers to purchase the team. The downsizing of the WHA only continued from there. After the 1976-77 season was over, the Phoenix Roadrunners, the San Diego Mariners, and the Calgary Cowboys would all cease operations, reducing the league to 8 teams, which prompted the league to remove the divisional format for the 1977-78 season.
Now into its 6th season, and still showing that it could continue on, despite the near-chaotic nature of its franchises, the WHA was making the NHL anxious. So, behind the newly appointed NHL president John Ziegler, the NHL's agenda was to make peace with the WHA and then eliminate it as a competitor.
It was to that end that secret meetings between Ziegler and WHA President Howard Baldwin were held in the hopes of hammering out a peace pact. They came close to an agreement in 1977 that would involve 6 WHA teams joining the NHL, but the proposal was voted down. One of the 6 teams vying for entry into the NHL was the Houston Aeros, but when negotiations resumed in 1978, Houston was no longer a part of the proposal that the WHA was offering. As a result, the Aeros elected to fold after the close of the 1977-78 season, reducing the league to 7 teams. Though a majority of the teams in the WHA had trouble staying in one place, or in business for that matter, there were a few that not only had a sense of stability, but also talent that was on par with the top NHL teams. Boasting the skills of the 3 Hows for 4 seasons, the Houston Aeros were the top team in the Western Division and in the league during the regular season from 1974 to 1977. In the Eastern Division, the number 1 team was the New England Whalers. Behind stars like Tom Webster and Terry Caffrey, the Whalers not only won the Eastern Division title for 3 consecutive years, but also the WHA's regular season title in 1973. On the Canadian side of things, there were 2 dominant teams. Firstly, there was the Quebec Nordiques, featuring J.C. Tremblay, Marc Tardif, and Réal Cloutier. And secondly, there was the Winnipeg Jets, who not only boasted former NHL superstar Bobby Hull, but also the Swedish forwards Anders Hedberg and Ulf Nilsson that played alongside Hull on the Jets' hotline. In fact, Winnipeg was unique in that they became the first North American club to seriously explore Europe as a source of hockey talent, further bolstering their team with acquisitions such as defenseman Lars-Erik Sjoberg, Willie Lidstrom, and Kent Nilsson. Both teams would win the Canadian Division once, as well as win 1 Eastern and Western Divisional title respectively. But when the playoffs rolled around, these 4 teams were just as hot. Since the NHL wouldn't be allowing the WHA to compete for the Stanley Cup, a new trophy was conceived to symbolize their league's championship, the Avco World Trophy.
The trophy was donated to the new league in 1972, along with approximately $500,000 by the Avco Financial Services Corporation. Thus, the WHA became the only major sports league to have its championship trophy bear the name of a private corporation.
However, the Avco Trophy, in fact, may have been most famous, or perhaps infamous, in its absence. When the New England Whalers won the league's inaugural championship in 1973, the trophy had not yet been completed, and the Whalers were forced to skate their divisional championship trophy around the ice surface instead, much to the embarrassment of the WHA office. Following New England's win in 1973, it would be the Howe-led Houston Aeros that won the next 2 Avco trophies in 1974 and 1975. Then, 2 seasons later, it would be the Quebec Nordiques who would skate away with the 1977 title. But the one dynastic team for the WHA was the Winnipeg Jets. Powered by the Hull-Hedberg-Nielsen hotline, the Jets would make it to the finals 5 times in 7 years and win the Avco Trophy 3 out of those 5 times, in 1976, 1978, and 1979. Their last championship was probably their most memorable, when they defeated the WHA's regular season champion, the Edmonton Oilers, who boasted star goalie Dave Dryden, as well as the WHA's Rookie of the Year Wayne Gretzky, who Edmonton had acquired from the Indianapolis Racers in an early season trade. Prior to the Jets' 1979 championship, the Indianapolis Racers franchise, feeling that the writing was on the wall for the WHA, decided to cease operations after playing only 25 games in the 1978-79 season. With the WHA now down to 6 teams, the negotiations for a partial merger with the NHL that took place during the 1978-79 season became more heated. What the NHL hoped to gain was a huge influx of cash, the return of defected players, and a peace in the new decade. All that remained was approval by the players, and on June 9, 1979, the NHL Players Association ratified the merger between the NHL and WHA, which, for legal and egotistical reasons, the NHL called an expansion. Thus, Quebec, Winnipeg, Edmonton, and New England, which would now be known as Hartford, were accepted into the NHL for the 1979-80 season, while Cincinnati and Birmingham were left to look for minor league affiliations for themselves. With this infusion of talent and cash, the NHL would set off into a new era as it entered the 1980s.